The worst student. Frank's hands trembled as he stared at his failing grade on the holographic screen, the red numbers blaring proof that he was the worst student the Galactic Academy had ever seen. At 22, Frank Foster was used to being an outsider. As the only human among a class of 30 mostly reptilian Norskins at Norika Prime's prestigious academy, he fought hard to keep up with their advanced curriculum in physics, engineering, and programming. Norskins were known across the galaxy for their cutting-edge tech and raw intelligence, and Frank wasn't. "Looks like the stupid human flunked out again," sneered Hydrus, a rich, arrogant Norskin who made Frank's life hell. "When are you going to quit embarrassing your kind and go back where you belong, mucking cages at a zoo?" Hydrus' cronies cackled as Frank's face went red. He glanced at his roommate Zix, hoping for backup, but the timid Norskin averted his eyes. Frank was on his own as usual. Only 2 months until final exams. 2 months until he'd either pass by some miracle or fail spectacularly and get his ass shipped back to Earth in disgrace. As the first human student ever admitted to the Galactic Academy, Frank had to succeed for himself and for humanity. Flunking out would mean more than just Frank's personal humiliation. It would mean humans everywhere being laughed at and dismissed by thousands of alien races as primitive, stupid beasts. Humanity would never be accepted in the galactic community. His whole species was counting on him. And here he was, dead last as always. Fail and go home a laughingstock, or pass and achieve his dream of becoming a starship engineer, exploring strange new worlds with an academy diploma as proof of humanity's worth. As the clock ticked closer to finals, the pressure mounted. Frank studied harder than ever before, spending sleepless nights poring over circuit diagrams and element tables. But nothing worked. His test scores stubbornly refused to rise. Hydrus and his gang grew bolder in their attacks, accidentally deleting Frank's homework, hacking his pad to show porn in class. Six tried to help, but he was as lost as Frank. This was it. 2 months to turn it all around, or humanity's first and only shot at the academy, and the stars would be lost forever. Frank clenched his fists. One way or another, he had to pass, even if it killed him. The practical test. Frank paced his quarters, running calculations in his head. His door chimed. It slid open to Zix, who had a grim expression on his reptilian face. "Did you hear? They announced the format for the final exam. It's a practical test. We have to run a simulated emergency scenario on the training ship." Frank's heart sank. Practicals were his worst area. In the controlled environment of the classroom, he could sometimes keep up. But under pressure, his mind always went blank. Zix continued, "We're being divided into teams. Guess who you're paired with? Hydrus." The next morning, Frank shuffled into the simulated bridge of the training vessel. Hydrus and 2 other Norskins, Scaros and Silo, were already there. They turned to glare at Frank as he entered. "Great, we got stuck with the human deadweight," Scaros hissed. "This is going to be a disaster." Frank's face burned, but he said nothing, sliding into the engineering station. The screen before him flashed red. Catastrophic power failure. Impact with X-Key 1542 Moon in 15 minutes. He scanned the readouts, his heart pounding. Main power was offline. Backup power failing. Engines, navigation, life support all dead. They were flying blind on a collision course with a barren moon. Hydrus clenched a fist on the command console. "Nav's not responding. I can't change course." "What about a cold start of the reactor?" Silo asked. "In 15 minutes. "Impossible," Scaros snapped. "We could eject the warp core." "Can't. Kill everyone on board." "Brilliant," Hydrus snarled. As they argued, Frank pulled up the ship schematics on his personal pad. He ran dozens of scenarios, fingers flying over the screen with growing excitement. He saw a path, narrow and risky, but possible, a way to route power from the impulse engines to the mains, enough for a short burst. "I have an idea," Frank said. The Norskins turned to him with sneers. "Give me a break," Hydrus scoffed. Frank ignored him, getting up and tracing the power flow on the schematic. "We still have battery reserves in the impulse drive here. If we manually override the safety interlocks and bridge the output to the main EPS conduits, we can shunt that power to the warp core for a quick start. Dangerous as hell, and we'll probably fry every circuit on the ship, but it should give us one shot at an emergency warp jump." Hydrus glared at the diagram, then at the clock. 12:34 until impact. "Fine," he spat. "We'll try it your way, human. But if this fails, it's on you." Frank nodded grimly. "I'll take that bet. Scaros, Tylo, you're with me in engineering. Strip the paneling on the ODN junctions and crosswire the plasma conduits. Hydrus, I need you on the bridge. When I give the word, initiate a warp jump. Any heading, maximum warp, and pray." In a blur of motion, they scrambled to their tasks. Frank led the others in a mad dash through the Jefferies tubes, ripping out isolinear chips and splicing cables. Scaros yelped as a live wire shocked him, but Frank barely paused, hands flying over the makeshift circuit, rerouting power. "And now," Frank cried over the comm. On the bridge, Hydrus watched in awe as the warp core thrummed to life. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The ship jolted as Hydrus slammed the control. For a breathless moment, nothing happened. Then, with a bone-shaking lurch, the mock vessel shot into warp, the moon receding behind them. "Simulation complete," the computer announced. "Scenario resolved." The students stumbled out of the training simulator. Dozens of eyes locked onto Frank. He stood tall, smudged with grease, a fierce light in his eyes. Zix broke the silence first. "Frank, that was amazing." "Damn right it was," Hydrus said quietly. He held out a hand to Frank. "I was wrong about you. We all were. You're no dead weight. You're the best of us." Proving himself. As the simulation ended and the students filed out, Frank suddenly found himself surrounded by his classmates, their expressions ranging from shock to grudging respect. Even Hydrus, who had been his most vocal critic, approached him with a hint of admiration in his reptilian eyes. "How did you do that, human?" Hydrus asked, his tone more curious than confrontational. "Where did you learn all that?" Frank shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. "I've been studying on my own outside of class. I've always been fascinated by how things work, the fundamental laws that govern the universe. I guess I just have a knack for seeing patterns and making connections." Zix nodded, his eyes wide with realization. "That's why you struggled in class. The Norscan way of teaching. It's all about memorizing facts and theories. But you think differently. You see how it all fits together in the real world." Frank grinned, feeling the surge of pride. "Exactly. I learn by doing, by getting my hands dirty and figuring things out for myself." As word of Frank's achievement spread through the academy, he found himself the center of attention. Students he had never spoken to before approached him in the halls, asking for advice or just wanting to hear his story. Even some of the faculty members began to take notice, whispering amongst themselves about the human prodigy in their midst. But not everyone was impressed. A few days after the simulation, Frank received a summons to the office of Dr. Zolek, the dean of the engineering department. Frank had never met the renowned Norscan scientist, but he knew him by reputation, a brilliant but ruthless academic who held great sway over the future of his students. As Frank entered Dr. Zolek's office, he was struck by the austerity of the space. The walls were bare, save for a few framed degrees and awards, and the only furniture was a large desk and two uncomfortable-looking chairs. Dr. Zolek himself was an imposing figure, his scales a deep shade of green and his eyes narrowed in suspicion. "Sit down, Mr. Foster," Dr. Zolek said, gesturing to one of the chairs. "I'll get straight to the point. I don't believe you solved that simulation on your own. I think you cheated." Frank's mouth fell open in shock. "What? No, I didn't cheat. I swear I did it all myself." Dr. Zolak leaned forward, his clawed hands folded on the desk. Do you expect me to believe that a human with no formal training could outperform the brightest Norscan minds? It's simply not possible. Frank felt a surge of anger and indignation. He stood up, meeting Dr. Zolak's gaze with defiance. Test me then. Ask me anything about engineering, about physics, about any subject. If I can't answer, I'll leave the academy and never come back. Very well, Mr. Foster. Let's begin. What followed was an intense intellectual battle, with Dr. Zolak firing off question after question, each more complex than the last. But Frank met him at every turn, drawing on his extensive self-study and his innate understanding of the principles at work. As the hours passed, Dr. Zolak's questions became more and more esoteric, delving into the cutting edge of theoretical physics and advanced propulsion systems. But still, Frank held his ground, not only answering the questions but offering his own insights and critiques of established Norscan theories. Finally, as the first rays of dawn began to peek through the office windows, Dr. Zolak sat back in his chair, a look of exhaustion and begrudging respect on his face. Enough, he said, holding up a hand. I concede. You have bested me, Mr. Foster. I apologize for my accusations. It's clear that I, and perhaps all of Norscan academia, have grossly underestimated the potential of the human mind. News of Frank's triumph over Dr. Zolak spread like wildfire through the academy. Suddenly, the lone human student was the talk of the campus, with students and faculty alike marveling at his intellect and his audacity in challenging the dean himself. In the days that followed, Frank found himself inundated with requests for tutoring, study groups, and collaborations. But the most surprising development came from Dr. Zolak himself. The dean offered Frank a prestigious research position, working alongside him on some of the most advanced projects in the field of space engineering. As Frank settled into his new role, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. He had come to the Galactic Academy as an outsider, a curiosity at best, and a laughingstock at worst. But through his own hard work and determination, he had proven himself not only equal to, but in many ways superior to, his Norscan peers. The secret mission. But Frank knew that his journey was far from over. With his newfound position and the respect of his colleagues, he had the opportunity to push the boundaries of what was possible, to help unlock the secrets of the universe for the benefit of all species. And as he looked out at the stars from his new office, Frank couldn't help but smile. He knew that he was just getting started, and that the future held limitless possibilities for him, and for the budding partnership between humans and Norscans. As Frank returned to Earth, he found himself thrust into the spotlight. News of his role in preventing an interstellar war had spread like wildfire, and he was hailed as a hero by the media and the public alike. Invitations to speak at conferences and events poured in from all corners of the globe. One such event was a high-profile conference on interspecies cooperation, held in the heart of New York City. Frank stepped onto the stage, his heart pounding as he faced a sea of eager faces. He took a deep breath and began to speak, his words flowing with a passion and sincerity that captivated the audience. He spoke of his experiences at the Galactic Academy, of the challenges he had faced as a human among Norscans. He spoke of the CAC and how a willingness to understand and communicate had averted a catastrophe. He urged the audience to embrace diversity, to seek out and learn from those who were different from themselves. As he spoke, Frank could see the impact his words were having. The audience hung on his every word, their eyes shining with a new understanding. When he finished, the applause was deafening, a roar of approval that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. In the days that followed, Frank's face was everywhere. His speech went viral, shared and reshared across social media platforms. He was interviewed by major news networks, his insights sought on everything from alien relations to the future of space exploration. Back at the Galactic Academy, Frank tried to return to his studies, but found it difficult to concentrate amidst the constant buzz of attention. He was just leaving a particularly grueling physics class when a voice called out to him. "Frank Foster, He turned to see a woman approaching him, her stride confident and purposeful. She was human, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of authority about her. "I'm Elena Blackwood," she said, extending her hand. "I represent an organization known as Omega Code. I believe we have much to discuss." Frank hesitated for a moment, then shook her hand. "I'm listening." Elena led him to a quiet corner of the campus, away from prying eyes and ears. "We've been watching you, Frank," she said. "Your achievements, your unique perspective. We believe you have a rare set of skills that make you uniquely suited for a special mission." Elena's expression turned grave. "We have evidence that a rogue faction of Norskans, led by a scientist named Dr. Zarl, is developing a weapon of unimaginable destructive power. They plan to use it to assert Norskan dominance over the galaxy." Frank felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard whispers of Dr. Zarl, a brilliant but unstable mind, feared even among his own people. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his gut. "We need you to stop him," Elena said simply. "Your knowledge of Norskan technology, your ability to think in ways they can't. You may be the only one who can prevent a catastrophe on a galactic scale." The next few weeks passed in a blur as Frank was put through a rigorous training regimen. He learned advanced espionage techniques, honed his combat skills, and was equipped with cutting-edge human technology, a personal cloaking device, a neural interface that allowed him to hack Norskan systems, tools that would be essential in his mission. But as he prepared, Frank couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He knew of Dr. Zarl's reputation for paranoia and ruthlessness. Had the scientists somehow caught wind of Omega Code's plan, Frank knew he would need to use every trick in his arsenal, every ounce of his human ingenuity, and his hard-won Norskan knowledge to outsmart Dr. Zarl. The stakes were higher than they had ever been. The fate of the galaxy, the lives of trillions, hung in the balance. As he stepped into the sleek stealth ship that would take him to Dr. Zarl's secret base, Frank felt a resolve settle over him. He was the only one who could do this, the only one standing between peace and destruction on a cosmic scale. The final battle. Frank's sleek stealth ship sliced through the void of space, its black hull blending seamlessly into the starry backdrop. Inside, Frank sat at the controls, his eyes locked on the looming shape of the asteroid ahead. Dr. Zarl's secret base. Frank's fingers danced over the console, activating his personal cloaking device. In an instant, his ship vanished from sight, its energy signature masked. He guided the invisible vessel towards a small hangar bay on the asteroid's surface, slipping past the base's advanced sensor arrays undetected. As the ship touched down, Frank checked his gear one last time. The neural interface, a marvel of human engineering, sat snugly against his temple. His handheld scanner, modified to detect Norskan tech, blinked readiness. With a deep breath, Frank engaged his personal cloak and stepped out into the hangar. The corridor beyond was dimly lit, the air thick with the hum of machinery. Frank moved silently, his cloaked form slipping past patrols of heavily armed Norskan guards. He followed the scanner's lead, navigating deeper into the heart of the base. Suddenly, the scanner began to pulse urgently. Frank paused, studying the readout. His eyes widened. The energy signature ahead was massive, unlike anything he had ever seen. He crept forward, the scanner guiding him to a large circular chamber. And there it was, Dr. Zarl's weapon, a monstrous particle accelerator, its rings stretching up and around the chamber's walls. Frank watched in horrified awe as streams of exotic particles raced around the ring, faster and faster, their trails blurring into a continuous pulsing glow. Frank's mind raced as he processed the implications. This was no ordinary weapon. Dr. Zarl was manipulating the very fabric of space-time, creating miniature black holes. Frank's blood ran cold. A weapon like this could annihilate entire planets, rip apart the very structure of the universe. Frank started forward, his hand reaching for the neural interface. But before he could take a step, a deep, sinister laugh echoed through the chamber. "Ah, Mr. Foster, I've been expecting you." Frank spun around. There, standing at the chamber's entrance, was Dr. Zarl himself. The Norscan scientist was flanked by a dozen guards, their weapons trained directly on Frank. Dr. Zarl smiled, his sharp teeth glinting in the pulsing light of the accelerator. "Did you really think your little cloaking trick would fool me? I've known about your mission from the start. Omega Code's communications are not as secure as they believe." Frank's mind raced, calculating his options. He was outgunned and outmatched, but he had one weapon Dr. Zarl could never anticipate: his human ingenuity. "I'll give you a choice, Mr. Foster," Dr. Zarl said, his voice dripping with malice. "Join me. With a mind like yours and technology like this, we could rule the galaxy. The Norscan Empire would be unstoppable." Frank met Dr. Zarl's gaze, his own eyes hard. "And if I refuse?" Dr. Zarl's grin widened. "Then you die here and now." Frank nodded slowly, as if considering. Then he spoke, his voice calm and measured. "Tell me, Dr. Zarl, are you certain of your subordinate's loyalty?" Dr. Zarl blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "It's just," Frank continued, "in my experience, when someone seeks power as ruthlessly as you, they often find a knife in their back." Frank saw it, the flicker of doubt in Dr. Zarl's eyes. He pressed on. "The Norscan government is not as oblivious as you think. They've been watching you, biding their time. How do you know one of your lieutenants isn't just waiting for the right moment to betray you and seize this weapon for themselves?" Dr. Zarl's gaze darted to his guards, suspicion clouding his features. Frank felt a surge of triumph. The seeds of paranoia were planted, and in that moment of distraction, Frank struck. His neural interface flared to life, instantly hacking into the base's security systems. The guards' weapons sparked and sizzled, turning in their hands to aim at each other. Chaos erupted as the Norscans fired on their own, the chamber filling with the scorch of plasma bolts. Frank leaped forward, his cloak shimmering as he moved. Dr. Zarl roared in rage, charging to meet him. They clashed in the center of the chamber, human agility against Norscan strength. Their battle raged, moving ever closer to the swirling vortex of the accelerator. The air crackled with energy, the pull of the miniature black hole tugging at them. Dr. Zarl lunged, his claws wrapping around Frank's throat. Frank choked, his vision blurring. With a last, desperate effort, he raised his hand to the neural interface. The chamber shook as the black hole destabilized, its swirling mass collapsing inward. Dr. Zarl's grip loosened as he was pulled off his feet, drawn towards the singularity. "No," he screamed, his voice raw with terror. "No." But it was too late. The black hole consumed him, his form stretching and distorting as he was pulled into the infinite darkness. His scream faded, swallowed by the void. Frank staggered back, the chamber quaking around him. Alarms blared as the accelerator tore itself apart, the black hole devouring itself from the inside out. With seconds to spare, Frank activated his cloak and ran, dodging falling debris and sparking machinery. He burst into the hangar just as the chamber collapsed behind him, a rush of escaping air propelling him forward. He leaped into his ship, his hands flying over the controls. The engines roared to life, lifting the vessel off the hangar floor and blasting out into space. With shaking hands, Frank opened a channel to Omega Code. "Mission accomplished," he said, his voice hoarse. "Dr. Zarl is dead. The weapon is destroyed." But even as relief washed over him, Frank couldn't shake a nagging sense of unease. This was a victory, yes, but something told him it was just the first skirmish in a much larger war. A war that would test him to his limits. A war for the fate of the galaxy itself. The hero's welcome. As Frank's ship docked at the Galactic Academy spaceport, he was greeted by a throng of cheering students and faculty. Banners waved and holographic fireworks exploded in the air, celebrating the return of the hero who had saved the galaxy from Dr. Zarl's doomsday weapon. Frank stepped onto the landing platform, his face a mix of exhaustion and humble gratitude. He was immediately surrounded by his classmates, who clapped him on the back and shouted their congratulations. Even Hydrus, his former tormentor, shook his hand with grudging respect. Frank returned the smile, but his eyes were serious. It's not over yet. Dr. Zarl may be gone, but his faction is still out there. We need to be vigilant. Dr. Zolek nodded, his expression sobering. Of course. But today we celebrate. The Norscan High Council has requested your presence. They wish to honor you for your service. Frank's brow furrowed. Honor me? How? They're offering you a position, Frank, special consultant to the Norscan military. It's an incredible opportunity. Frank was silent for a long moment. A military position. The idea sat uneasily with him. His passion was for science, for exploration and discovery, not for war. I'll have to think about it, he said finally. Dr. Zolek looked surprised, but didn't press the issue. Of course. Take your time, but don't think too long. The galaxy needs minds like yours, Frank, now more than ever. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of celebrations and ceremonies. Frank was lauded as a hero, his face plastered across every news feed in the quadrant. But even as he smiled and waved, his mind was troubled. He was in his quarters, poring over star charts and data readouts, when the call came in. It was Alina, her face grave on the view screen. Frank, we need you, she said. There have been attacks on human and Norscan colonies across the galaxy, entire populations disappearing without a trace. Frank's blood ran cold. Who's responsible? We don't know. But whoever they are, their technology is beyond anything we've seen before. They strike without warning, leaving no survivors. Frank, we need your help. Frank's mind was racing. A new threat, just as he had feared. But this was different. This was an enemy that attacked not with weapons, but with silence, with absence. I'm in, he said, his voice steady. What do you need me to do? Our analysts have found a pattern to the attacks, Alina said. The targeted colonies all share specific geological and atmospheric conditions. We think that by studying these conditions, we might be able to predict the next attack, to stop it before it happens. Frank nodded, his brain already spinning with possibilities. I'll need a team. The best scientists and engineers, human and Norscan. And equipment, sensors, probes, anything that can help us detect this alien presence. You'll have it, Alina promised. Whatever you need. But Frank, this mission, it's off the books. Strictly need to know. If word gets out, if these aliens realize we're on to them. I understand, Frank said. We'll keep it quiet. As the call ended, Frank sat back in his chair, his mind whirling. A new mission, a new challenge, and a new chance to prove himself, not just as a scientist, but as a defender of the galaxy. He thought of the Norscan military position still waiting for his response. It seemed so insignificant now, in the face of this new threat. This was where he was needed. This was where he could make a difference. Frank stood, his eyes fixed on the stars outside his window. Somewhere out there, an enemy lurked, an enemy that threatened everything he held dear. But they had no idea what was coming for them. They had no idea the storm they had unleashed. Frank Foster was on the case, and this time, he wouldn't stop until the job was done. The final sacrifice. As Frank raced back to the Galactic Academy, his mind churned with the horrifying implications of what he had discovered. The mysterious alien attacks were not random acts of aggression, but part of a sinister plan to harvest and transform the citizens of the galaxy into a new hybrid species. He knew he had to act fast, before more colonies fell victim to the aliens' machinations. Bursting into the Academy's command center, Frank called an emergency meeting with his most trusted allies. Among them was Hydrus, his former rival turned staunch supporter. The Norscan's eyes widened as Frank laid out the evidence of the alien factories and their grim purpose. We have to shut them down, Frank said, his voice steely with resolve. But we can't do it alone. We need a team of the best the brightest, the most skilled operatives from both our species. Hydrus nodded, his reptilian features set in grim determination. I know just the warriors for the job. They'd been itching for a chance to prove themselves against a worthy foe. Within hours, Frank and Hydrus had assembled a crack team of human and Norscan operatives, each handpicked for their unique abilities and expertise. There was Zara, the human hacker who could infiltrate any system. Croc, the Norscan marksman with a talent for impossible shots, and a dozen others, all united in their determination to stop the alien threat. The journey to the factory was tense and silent, each member of the team lost in their own thoughts as they prepared for the battle ahead. Frank pored over the intelligence they had gathered, looking for any weakness in the aliens' defenses. Suddenly, the ship's alarms blared to life. Incoming hostiles, Zara shouted from her console. A swarm of drones, coming in fast. Frank leaped to the viewport, his eyes widening at the sight of the alien machines. They were small and nimble, darting through space with uncanny precision. They seemed to anticipate the ship's every move, as if they could read the minds of those on board. Croc grinned, his claws already dancing over the weapon's controls. Plasma bolts lanced out into the void, picking off the drones one by one. But for every machine destroyed, two more seemed to take its place, their attacks growing more vicious with each passing second. Gritting his teeth, Frank realized they couldn't win this battle through firepower alone. They needed to outthink the drones, to find a way past their defenses. His fingers flew over his console, calling up the codes and algorithms he had spent months perfecting. Zara nodded, her own hands a blur as she patched Frank's console into the ship's main computer. Taking a deep breath, Frank closed his eyes and let his mind merge with the machine, his consciousness expanding out into the digital realm. In the space of a heartbeat, he was among the drones, his virtual presence darting and weaving through their ranks. He could see the patterns in their movements, the logic behind their attacks, and he could see the flaws, the weaknesses that could be exploited. With a thought, he sent a pulse of corrupted code into the swarm, watching with satisfaction as the drones faltered and spun out of control. Seizing the opening, Croc and the other gunners unleashed a barrage of fire, tearing through the disoriented machines like tissue paper. As the last of the drones exploded into a cloud of shrapnel, Frank sagged back in his seat, his mind reeling from the exertion. But there was no time to rest, no time to celebrate their small victory. The factory loomed ahead, a vast and menacing structure bristling with defenses. Steeling himself, Frank stood and faced his team. "This is it," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "We breach those walls, we find out what the aliens are doing to our people, and we put a stop to it, no matter the cost." Hydrus stepped forward, his hand clasping Frank's shoulder in a gesture of solidarity. "We're with you, Foster. To the end." As one, the team readied their weapons and prepared to infiltrate the alien stronghold. Frank knew that the battles to come would push them all to their limits, testing their courage, their ingenuity, and their resolve. But he also knew that they would meet those challenges head-on, united in their determination to defend their worlds and their way of life. The ship sliced through the void, a glinting dagger aimed at the heart of the alien threat, and within its walls, a band of heroes steeled themselves for the fight of their lives. 4-0